Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? We have a very special story to cover today. This is an exclusive. So I have some classified documents, court documents, and a whole bunch of other things from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Spanish courts. And this is extremely important because this relates to Julian Assange's case. We're going to talk about someone named David Mendoza. Last month in the High Court, during Assange's appeal, they mentioned Mendoza. Why? Because the United States is giving assurances, diplomatic assurances, that they're not going to send Julian Assange to ADX Florence, which is this horrible prison in Colorado, and that Assange can serve his sentence in Australia. They said the same thing to Mendoza. They told Mendoza that he can go back to Spain to serve his sentence. They gave him diplomatic assurances as well. Guess what? They lied. And I have the proof right here. And the U.S. prosecutor, the lead prosecutor last month, James Lewis, what did he tell the High Court? He said, the United States, this is a direct quote, he said, the United States have never broken a diplomatic assurance ever. Well, that's a lie. And I have the proof right here. So we're going to go into this article that I wrote. It's on Substack. All the documents are there, and I'm going to show them to you today. And I'm going to break this down. It's very, very important to understand this because this dismantles the whole appeal against Assange, right? The whole premise is that don't worry, just give us Assange. We'll take care of him. He won't be suicidal because we're not going to put him in SAMS. We're not going to send him to ADX. He can serve his sentence in Australia. This is a lie. And I'm going to show you exactly what they have planned for him because it's going to work out the exact same way, okay? So this is the article that I wrote. RichardMedhurst.substack.com/Mendoza. The link is in the description and in the chat. So we're just going to start off with the basics. Mendoza, he was born in the United States. He's raised in the United States, but he's both Spanish and American, right? So his mother is Spanish. He has family in Spain, and he would go to Spain every summer. He knows Spain very well. He speaks Spanish as well. And by the way, just in case this isn't clear, I interviewed him multiple times for this article, okay, in addition to having all the receipts. So he would go to Spain all the time, right? He has a very strong relationship with Spain. And in the early 2000s, he was moving marijuana from Canada to Seattle, Washington, right? So he was moving what they call BC Bud, right? And the authorities found out, right? He was moving marijuana in helicopters, and they caught on to him. How did they catch on to him? So basically, they put a bunch of GPS trackers, not just on his car, but all of the cars, all of his company cars, because Mendoza was working in building, property development, things like that. He's making good money, right? He's making a lot of money, and that's relevant because you're going to see what happened to his money, what the U.S. did to that. So he wasn't short of money, but he had a lot of building projects, as he told me, and he had too much ambition, and he needed some more money to subsidize them and so on, right? So it wasn't for him; he just needed the money. But they started catching on to him, right? They put GPS trackers under his car. He got rear-ended, the bumper fell off, he took it to a repair shop, and they found this GPS tracker underneath. Another thing, he finds out from a neighbor that the house across the street from him has been rented by federal agents. No one was going to rent that house because the rent was like $6,000 a month, right? So the fact that it was rented by the government, I mean, this immediately set off alarm bells. So what does Mendoza do? He exchanges cars with one of the waitresses working at his restaurants, and he drives to the Mexican border, and he stays in Mexico for a month at some property that he has there, okay? And after a month, he sees that there's an international arrest warrant. He goes to Spain, to Madrid, okay? So he arrives in Madrid in June 2006. June 2006. 2 years later, he's arrested in Spain at the request of the U.S., okay? So the U.S. want to extradite him. They want to extradite him for drug trafficking, money laundering, and currency structuring, okay? So they tell Spain, give us Mendoza. We want to try him. We want to send him to jail. And Spain says, well, hold on a second. Mendoza, because he's been in Spain for 2 years now, right? June 2006, June 2008. Mendoza has a family now. He's married. He has children. So he has one child who's 9 months old with Down syndrome, and he has another child on the way at this time. And he has a house. So he's settled in Spain. So in Spain, if you go to jail, they can't send you to, a jail on the other side of the country. They have to send you to a jail that is close to your family, so they can respect. This is under the European Convention of Human Rights. It's the right to private and family. The right to respect for private and family life. That means they can't punish your family because you committed a crime. They send you to jail, but they can't deprive your family of seeing you. Okay? So Spain put a condition on his extradition. Spain said, you can take Mendoza to the United States, but you have to send him back to serve his sentence. Right? So now it's very similar to what they're saying with Assange. The US is offering, Assange can go serve his sentence in his home country in Australia. Right? Let me show you what happened here. So the Spanish court, okay, the Spanish National Court, they published 2 rulings. So this ruling here is August 2008, and this one is November 2008. Okay? Both of these rulings say very clearly that Mendoza has to serve his sentence in Spain. He has to serve his sentence in Spain. And there are 2 other conditions as well. The second condition is that he can't be given a life sentence. In Spain, there are no life sentences. So the extradition has to comply with Spanish law. Do you understand? So he has to serve his sentence in Spain, no life sentence, and the third condition is no currency structuring, because that doesn't exist under Spanish law. Do you see how all of this has to comply with Spanish law? He has to be close to his family, no life sentence, and no currency structuring charge. Okay? Now, Spain issued this ruling in August 2008. Do you know what the U.S. prosecutors did? The U.S. prosecutor said, you can't do that. You don't have the right to put conditions on an extradition. The Spanish court comes out with the second ruling that I just showed you here, November 2008, saying, oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. Because under the extradition treaty, if you're extraditing a Spanish national, the court has the right to impose conditions on that extradition. So in January 2009, the United States Embassy, they sent this, okay? This is a diplomatic assurance. This is exactly what they are giving Assange now, okay? And I have this for you right here. Let's take a look at this verbal note from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. Look at what it says. So they list all of the charges here: conspiracy to import more than 1,000 kilos of marijuana, and all the charges. And look at this one highlighted here. What's number 5? Structuring currency transactions. Didn't I just tell you that Spain said no currency structuring charge? The Americans don't care. They just threw it in anyway. So there are court orders specifically saying you cannot try him for this because it's not a crime in Spain. And they're like, no, we're just going to put it in there anyway. But that's not the biggest point. Take a look at this. Okay? So they're saying here, the Western District of Washington and Seattle has further indicated that it does not object to Mendoza making an application to serve his sentence in Spain. They do not object to him making an application to serve a sentence in Spain. They can't do that anyway. Every prisoner has the right to apply for a transfer. So it's not up to the United States to say, oh, we don't mind you applying. Do you see how they're cheating in the language? Spain said you have to send him back. That's not what it says here in this assurance from the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy isn't saying we will send you Mendoza. They're saying we don't object to him applying to serve a sentence in Spain. That is absolutely not the same thing. But do you see how they're already cheating in the language? And here's another thing. They say here, for the life sentence, they say that the prosecutors will not seek a sentence of life imprisonment. And so I'm just going to read you the full paragraph. The United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington and Seattle has indicated to the Office of International Affairs that if Mendoza is extradited from Spain, it will not seek a sentence of life imprisonment, and that it will do everything within its power to ensure that Mendoza receives a determinate sentence of incarceration. Here we go again. They're playing with the language. They say, we're not going to give him a life sentence, but we're going to give him a determinate amount of incarceration. What does that mean? 5 months? 5 centuries? 500 years? What does that mean? So what they do is they extradite you to the US, and then they give you 300 years in prison. And then you go, and hold on, but that's a life sentence. And they, no, it's not. That's not a life sentence. We gave him 300 years. Yeah, but it's akin to a life sentence. Do you see how they cheat in the wording? So everything is right there. They violated all the conditions already. They put the currency structuring charge in the assurance. They said that they won't give him a life sentence, but they might give him something that's like a life sentence. And they won't object to him making an application. That's not the same thing as we'll send him back to Spain. That's not the same thing at all. Okay? So Mendoza knew that, there's something wrong with this assurance. So he took it to the court. Okay? He took it to the court. And you know what Spain did? Spain agreed. The court agreed. And they're like, yeah, there's something up with this assurance. So the Spanish court told the Spanish government, you guys need to make sure the United States complies with the conditions that we set out. You need to make sure. How do you make sure? They came up with this. This is the Acta de Entrega, this document right here, okay? The Acta de Entrega is a deed of surrender. And this is a very, very, very important document. Very important. Because what it says, it's in Spanish, but I have the English translation for you as well, right? So what it says over here, it says that Mendoza will be surrendered in accordance with what was previously stipulated by Section 2 of the National Criminal Court. What does that mean? That means that if you sign this paper, you're not just accepting to take Mendoza, you're accepting the conditions of the court. That means you got to send him back to Spain. That means you can't try him for currency structuring, and you can't give him a life sentence. And by the way, regarding the life sentence, Spain made it very clear. They said no life sentence or equivalent term of confinement, because they know that the Americans are going to play games, right? They might give him 500 years, whatever, right? Look at Assange, for example, 175 years. That's a life sentence. Even 30 years at that age is like a life sentence. So this paper is extremely important. This paper is extremely important. And they stipulated that right here. So Mendoza, he's extradited on April 30th, 2009, right? And he was with the Spanish police, a Spanish diplomat, and waiting for him were U.S. Marshals and a representative of the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, Kimberly Weiss. Kimberly Weiss. So they stripped him, they put him in the orange jumpsuit, and then they all signed this document. Look at the signatures. That's the Spanish police, that's David Mendoza, and that is Kimberly Weiss from the U.S. government. So even though these diplomatic assurances are not assuring at all, right? The United States signed this document in accordance with the conditions imposed by the court. That means, this means you have to send back Mendoza. You just signed a contract, right? Because it's not just saying, oh, we're handing over David Mendoza to the U.S. authorities. It says we're handing Mendoza over to the U.S. authorities in accordance with what the Spanish National Court ruled. So she signed that. That's the Embassy of the United States. She signed that. She signed that document. It's right here. Embassy of the United States, Kimberly Weiss. This is the official English translation, right? So all three people signed this, and this is so important. This is so important that all three of them signed it, and you're going to see why. Now, this is Kimberly Weiss. So I looked her up, and you can see as early as 2019, as recently as 2019, she's still working at the U.S. Embassy, okay, in Madrid. And I even found a video of her. So let's take a look at this video, because I think there's a quote in there which is, I mean, really telling. It's really telling.
And I am very ready to help. I know the police, I know the prosecutors, I know where they can go.
She says, I know the police, I know the prosecutors. Oh, yeah, she does. Oh, yeah, she does. When I showed that to Mendoza, he was disgusted. He was really disgusted. He told me that it's so revolting how the Americans are so integrated into the Spanish legal system, right? Like that she's being almost arrogant. I know the police, I know the prosecutors. Oh yeah, she does. She's not kidding when she says that, right? So when Mendoza gets to the United States, this is what happens. The first thing they do is an arbitration hearing or a settlement conference. These are very fancy terms to basically say that it's where you do a plea bargain. You make a deal with the prosecutors. Now, with Mendoza, they wanted a building that he owned. I told you he worked in building and development. So there was a building in Tacoma that they really wanted. Now, this building is worth $2 million at the very least. I don't remember the exact figure, but $2 million at the very least. And the United States government wanted it. And the prosecutors told them, if you give us this building in Tacoma, we will not oppose your transfer back to Spain. Okay? They said, you give us this building, we won't oppose your transfer request to Spain. Mendoza told them to put it in writing. He says, I don't trust you guys. Put it in writing that you're not going to oppose the transfer. They refused. And here's the logic. Because apparently during an arbitration hearing or a settlement conference, they don't do transcripts. They don't do things in writing. Because, for example, you might have someone who agrees, who says they'll cooperate against, there'll be a witness against other people. And then they decide not to do it. And, if it's there in writing, you might put people in trouble and so on. So fair enough. That's just how they do it usually. But the judge, Ricardo Martinez, he told Mendoza, don't worry. I'm here to make sure that they keep their word. Who are the prosecutors? Take a look. We're talking about Susan Rowe, Roger Rajoff, Richard Cohen, and Jenny Durkin. Do you know who Jenny Durkin is? She's the mayor of Seattle now. Nice promotion, right? So the lead prosecutor against Mendoza is Jenny Durkin. And she likes to come across as some kind of huge progressive. And there you go. Jenny Durkin. So Mendoza gave them the building. He agreed in the end to give them the building. I have a list of all the properties that he gave them. Here's the list. This is not all of them. This is just some of them. Forfeited property. You see here the second one, Tacoma Avenue South. That's the building that he gave them in Washington. But that's not all he gave them. At this point, the United States government had taken $14 million worth of assets from Mendoza. Yeah, $14 million. Because you remember how I told you he was 2 years in Spain before they arrested him? Mendoza, he thinks that they didn't have any evidence tying him to narcotics. You see, there are a lot of things that the article is already so long, and I couldn't put every single detail, but just to give you an example, they sent someone to his house with a wire because he later found out that this guy had a wire in the court documents, right? So they couldn't find enough things to tie him to narcotics. So what they did is they tried to trick him into coming back into the United States. So they had already started seizing his properties before he was even indicted or extradited. And in the United States, they come to your property, they put a notice on it, and it says you have 90 days to challenge this in court. Yeah, you have to be in court. Mendoza hired a lawyer. Doesn't work. When you want to challenge forfeiture in civil court, you have to be there yourself. You have to come to the United States. So he thinks that this was a trick. They were taking all of his property to try and get him to come back to the United States so he could challenge it in court, right? So at this point, when they took the building in Tacoma, I mean, this guy, they already took $14 million. And you have to understand something. The majority of this doesn't have anything to do with narcotics because he asked the judge, Thomas Zilli is the judge. He asks him, how much money do you think I made in marijuana? The judge didn't know. He asked the prosecutor, Jenny Durkin, right? Or at least the prosecution. And the prosecution say that he made around $2 million for marijuana. So he's telling them, okay, let's take the prosecution's figure. Let's say I made $2 million. Why don't you just take $2 million from me and let me keep the 12? And this is the quote that the judge told him, right? He told him, young man, in the United States of America, when you mix one dirty penny with 100 clean pennies, it becomes United States property. Wow. Way to screw someone out of a load of money. So that's what they did. They took all of his stuff. All of his stuff. Now, that's not all. Look how this is during sentencing, what I'm about to tell you now, okay? So Mendoza, he's looking at 14 years. They're going to give him 14 years. And look at this interaction with the judge. Because Mendoza is telling them to respect the conditions of the extradition and send him back to Spain. And the judge asks him, do you know under what instrument you were extradited to the United States? Actually, you know what? Hold on. I actually interviewed Mendoza on video as well. Let me just show you how he explains it. I'll let him explain it, okay?
Your Honor, there's some...
Take a look.
I said, Your Honor, there's some conditions that I want the court to recognize and respect of why Spain sent me, extradited me to the United States that are required of the extradition. And he looked at me and he put his glasses down and he said, young man, he said, and I said, one of those conditions, excuse me, I said, one of those conditions were I am to serve my sentence in Spain as promised. And he said, young man, he said, are you familiar with the international instrument that has brought you to the United States? I said, yes. Do you know the name of that instrument? I said, yeah, it's the Spanish-U.S. extradition treaty. And he said, correct. He said, can I ask you another question? I said, obviously, you're the judge. He says, are you signatory on that? And I said, signatory? I said, obviously not. It's done by my government. Yours is done by your government, but it applies to all of us. He said, it does apply, but if you're not signatory, you don't have a right to claim. Meaning my government would have to make a claim against non-compliance of the treaty or the conditions that were applied within that treaty.
The agreement to send... Incredible, right? I mean, it's incredible. So do you see the logic that they're using here? They're telling him that you didn't sign the extradition treaty, so you don't have a claim. That's their logic. I mean, how can you make these things up, honestly? Of course, he didn't sign the extradition treaty because extradition treaties are signed between, governments. It's a treaty. It's not between natural people. That's the logic. It said your signature is not on the extradition treaty, so you don't have a claim. Look what Mendoza told me that they're going to do to Assange. He thinks they're going to do the exact same thing. The exact same thing. So he told me that within that note, the diplomatic note, it must specifically state that Julian has a right to contest non-compliance of the U.S. even as a non-signatory to the treaty, because the U.S. will start playing games, right? So the thing is with Mendoza, he did sign a piece of paper. He did sign a piece of paper with the U.S. government and Spain. I showed it to you a few minutes ago. The Acta de entrega. And this document is a contract, and it says you have to send him back. You cannot give him a life sentence. You can't try him for currency structuring. Do you know where this document was? They wouldn't give it to Mendoza. So he submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for this document, and they wouldn't give it to him. The U.S. government, nor Spain, both of them, Spain and the U.S. government wouldn't give him this document. They told him it's a diplomatic communication, it's classified, and he doesn't have the right, he's not privy to diplomatic communications, even though he read it and signed it. It's got his signature on it. I mean, what kind of a game is that? And better yet, do you know what they gave him? They gave him a copy of it without his signature, so he can't contest it in court. Look at this. They gave him a copy of the Acta de entrega with the signature of the U.S. police and the Spanish police, but not his signature. So it's useless. It's useless. He can't contest in court, right? And so this is very important because without this is what the United States is going to do to Assange. They're going to say, well, listen, you are not allowed to contest this because you are not a signatory to the extradition treaty between the U.S. and the UK. You have no claim to contest non-compliance. We didn't sign a contract with you. That's the exact logic they used with Mendoza, and they will do it with Assange. Absolutely. So Mendoza gets sentenced to 14 years in prison in the U.S. He asks them, send me back to Spain. They say, no, you have to apply for your transfer under a treaty transfer. Okay? So he applies. And they tell him after 8 months, No. Here's a document. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice, dated 2010, July 2010. They say, after considering all appropriate factors involved in this matter, the United States has denied the request for transfer to Spain of the above-named Spanish national. The prisoner is currently incarcerated at the SeaTac Federal Detention Center in Seattle, Washington. The U.S. denied the transfer request because of the seriousness of the offense, because the prisoner is a domiciliary of the United States, because the prisoner is a poor candidate due to his criminal history, and because of serious law enforcement concerns. There is no administrative appeal from this decision. Unless otherwise noted above, the prisoner may reapply 2 years after this denial. They screwed him. They screwed him. Mendoza applied 3 times. 3 times he applied for treaty transfer. And as you see, you have to wait 2 years every time they deny you. He applied 3 times, and 3 times they denied him. So much for those diplomatic assurances, right? So much for the contract, right? So Mendoza, when he got denied the first time in 2010, what I just showed you, he sued Spain because he figured, well, the United States, they're not going to help me. I need to go sue Spain. I need to sue Spain so they pressure the US into sending me back. That was his logic. Okay, so Mendoza, he goes first to the criminal courts, and the lower court said, we can't help you. It went to the criminal Supreme Court. The criminal Supreme Court refused to touch it. And then in Spain, he went to the constitutional court, right? They refused to touch it. The third option was the civil court. So Mendoza filed 2 lawsuits against Spain, okay? Number 1, the conditions of his extradition have been violated. And number 2, his human rights have been violated. Both of these cases, he won them. Supreme Court cases in Spain, he won them. 2 cases. I mean, it's incredible. And it's all the more incredible because when you have 2 Supreme Court cases in Spain that state the same thing, it creates a legal precedent. So this is really when the U.S. starts feeling some pressure. You know why? Because the Spanish Supreme Court, they ordered the Spanish government to hand over their diplomatic communications with the U.S. They want to see, what have you guys been doing to get back Mendoza from the United States? Do you guys know how many times Spain asked for Mendoza? Take a guess. I want to see in the comments right now, how many times do you think the Spanish government asked for Mendoza to be sent back? I'm going to tell you, it's not a lot. Bill says 0. Tim says 1. Close enough. 2 times. 2 times. 2 times the Spanish government asked for Mendoza. The Spanish Supreme Court looked at that and they said, this is ridiculous. Here's the court ruling. I have the court ruling for you as well. Okay? So, the conclusion from the Spanish Supreme Court, this is the official English translation. They said that they require that the government of Spain take all measures to ensure that the United States surrender appellant to the Spanish government in order to serve his sentence in Spain, or else justify the impracticability of implementing said measures with the exception of those already adopted. So they said, you need to do everything. You need to do everything to get Mendoza back. Do you know what the Spanish government tried? Actually, just before this Supreme Court ruling, they visited Mendoza in Spain. The Spanish diplomats visited him in prison in the U.S. And they told him, here's this piece of paper, sign this piece of paper. And he looks at it, and it turns out they were agreeing, they were willing to send him to Spain immediately if he signed this piece of paper. And the problem is, if he signed it, 5 Colombians from Spain would go to the U.S. and he would go from the U.S. to Spain. So the United States government was willing to swap him in exchange for 5 Colombians. He told them no. I mean, I think he said it best when I'll just read you how he told it to me, right? The diplomat was outraged by Mendoza's refusal to comply. Quote, she had a look of shock on her face and told me in Spanish, why are you always making everything so difficult? Mendoza snapped at her, ma'am, you are making things difficult. You are the ones not following the court order. The court order doesn't say 5 Colombians or 5 Germans in exchange for Mendoza. And Mendoza thinks this was a manipulation tactic because this was just before the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. And now you might be asking yourself, well, what's the relationship here? Why would the Spanish government send diplomats to get Mendoza back right before the Supreme Court ruling? I'll tell you why. Because this Supreme Court ruling is what really put pressure on the United States. The Spanish Supreme Court said, if you guys in the government don't get Mendoza back, we will suspend the extradition treaty. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Spanish Supreme Court threatened to suspend the extradition treaty with the US if they didn't get Mendoza back. That's when the Americans really started sweating. And that's why the diplomats tried to get him back before the ruling. And, you know, Mendoza, I got to tell you something about him, because this guy was in jail every day writing to members of the Spanish Congress, judges, senior judges, lawyers, everyone. And he told me that he was spending his time in prison at the law library. He was learning criminal law. He was studying cases and learning how the United States had violated assurances to other people, right? So that's how he learned the game. That's how he learned the game. And as I told you, he was writing to all these judges, right? So actually, he started getting support in Spain, you know? This is what is different from Assange in a few ways, is that in Spain, Mendoza had a lot of public support. A lot of public support. He had judges in the Spanish legal system who supported him, right? To the point, one judge sent him the golden ticket in the mail. An anonymous judge sent him the Acta de entrega. You remember I told you that Mendoza tried to get this document with a FOIA request? Spain told him no. The US government told him no because it has his signature on it. And he can contest the United States non-compliance with this piece of paper. Well, a Spanish judge, a senior Spanish judge, sent it to him and it's hidden in a stack of documents in jail. Okay? And I'll tell you what Mendoza did with this in a second. Here's another example. This is a letter from a senior Spanish judge in the Audiencia Nacional. Okay? So the Spanish National Court. So he says here that he wants Mendoza to be returned immediately, okay? And the thing is that hold on, let me see. He said that they better return Mendoza, quote, because not doing so could compromise future extraditions from Spain to the United States, a country in which up to this moment has existed a fluent and fruitful legal cooperation. It's a veiled threat. So this judge is essentially telling them, send back Mendoza or you're not going to have any more extraditions. And he sent this to the Minister of Justice in Spain, and he called the U.S. ambassador in Spain and gave it to him. And so what Spanish judges started doing in Spain is they didn't block extraditions. They just let them pile up. They wouldn't process them. And this is when the United States began to feel the pressure, right? Because the Supreme Court was threatening the extradition treaty. Judges weren't processing extraditions anymore, and Mendoza was getting more support. So I told you, a judge sent him this document, right? The first thing he did, he sued the United States, because with this document, he was able to go to civil court, right? He filed a civil suit against the Department of Justice and Eric Holder. Eric Holder was Obama's attorney general, right? Here's the complaint. This is the official complaint, right? David Mendoza versus the United States of America and Eric Holder in his capacity as the Attorney General of the United States of America. And so this is a complaint for breach of contract, fraudulent inducement, mandamus relief, and equitable estoppel. So he's suing them because they signed this contract to send him back to Spain and they didn't do it. They violated this contract. So I spoke to Mendoza's lawyer, the one who filed this complaint who filed this suit against the DOJ. And he told me that as he was booking plane tickets to go to Seattle for oral arguments for this case, right? As he was booking plane tickets, he gets a phone call. It's the prosecutor from the Western District in Seattle, Washington. They told him, listen, if Mendoza drops the lawsuit against the DOJ, he can go back immediately. Took it. He took the deal. So they agreed to send Mendoza back. This is the approved transfer. This is from 2015, right? So they say the United States has approved the request of the above referenced prisoner to transfer to Spain to serve his prison sentence. So again, just to recap, Mendoza had sued Spain in 2 cases at the Supreme Court and won, and now he was suing the United States in civil court, and they told him, if you drop this civil suit, we'll let you go. He dropped it, they let him go. But on his way out, they tried another trick. They tried to pull another trick on him. So he tells me that they were bringing a group of prisoners to process them for extradition. And they told all of these prisoners, including him, to sign a piece of paper saying that they will agree to serve their sentence once they get to the place where they're being extradited, right? Now, let me tell you why this is a trick, because Mendoza's crime in Spain would have landed him 6 years, not 14. So why should he sign a paper saying he's going to serve out his full sentence, meaning 14 years? If the sentence in Spain is 6 years, he would be screwing himself by signing that. So he told the judge no. And the judge called recess, and Mendoza, he suspects that the judge probably called someone in Washington, D.C., and they just told him to let him go. And you have to understand something about extraditions, because who signed this? Look at this this paper here, okay? When they denied Mendoza's transfer, Paula Wolf, she's the one who signed that, okay? Now, Paula Wolf, she's the head of transfers at the DOJ, the head of prison transfers. And in order to extradite someone from the US, you need to get approval from the CIA, the FBI, the DEA, the State Department. They all need to accept that Mendoza is okay to be sent to Spain. So I think it stands to reason when Mendoza tells me that they were feeling the heat from this, right? They just wanted to get rid of him. So in the end, he did not sign that paper saying he will serve his full sentence. They're just like, get rid of him, and they sent him back to Spain. Now, the story's not over, because guess what happens when he gets back to Spain? So in Spain, you have a judge called Grande Marlaska. Okay, let me show you down here. This is Grande Marlaska, okay? Now, he spoke with Mendoza's attorney when Mendoza got back from the US. And he told Mendoza's attorney that he'll walk free, because Mendoza spent 6 years and 9 months trying to get back from the US. And as I told you, the sentence in Spain is 6 years. So Mendoza's already done the time, right? So there's no need to send him to prison. He's done the time. 3 days later, Marlaska calls Mendoza's attorney and says, no, actually, he has to do the 14 years. So he went from, you're a free man, to you have to do the 14 years in 3 days. What do you guys think happened? I mean, I have my opinion, but I'm just going to tell you what Mendoza and his attorney suspect. It's the United States that put pressure, and namely this person over here, Kimberly Weiss, right, from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. I know the police, I know the prosecutors, she says, right? So that's what Mendoza and his attorney suspect. Now, either way, regardless of what the motivations are, I'm going to tell you why this is very wrong and illegal, because you cannot apply a sentence retroactively. You cannot punish someone with a new law, because that's exactly what Marlaska was doing. In Spain, while Mendoza was gone, they changed the law. The sentence was raised from 6 years to 15 years. And here's what he says in the ruling, okay? And it's in Spanish, but I'm going to translate it to you. He says down here that since the punishment of 168 months, meaning 14 years, is not, it doesn't breach the principle of proportionality in regards to Spanish law. And so he's not changing the sentence. There it is highlighted, that it's not possible to modify the sentence imposed by the US. Right? So he's saying, well, in the United States, they gave you 14 years. And now in Spain, with the new law, the maximum penalty is 15 years. So yeah, it's not disproportionate. You will serve the 14 years. Unbelievable, right? So just to recap, Mendoza, he's extradited in 2009. 6 years, 9 months he spent trying to get back to Spain, and they only allowed him to go after he sued Spain in the Supreme Court and won twice, and also sued the Department of Justice and Eric Holder. And then he gets back, and they tell him, no, actually, he went to prison. He did another 4 years, and he was released in 2019, because in Spain, when you do 2/3 of your sentence, you can get out on conditional release. However, like I said, you can't punish someone for an old crime with a new law. Mendoza's crimes were in the early 2000s, right? And he was sentenced in 2009. This law is after 2009. You can't take a new law and punish someone for an old crime. Everywhere, in every jurisdiction, this is absurd. It's outlawed. So, I mean, we're talking about, I actually listed them all here. Look, the United Nations, the European Convention of Human Rights, the Spanish Constitution, it's all banned. You cannot retroactively sentence someone. So you know what Mendoza did? He went to the United Nations. The United Nations usually take 1 to 2% of the cases that are brought before them. They took his, right? They agreed to take his case. Here it is. This is from the UN, August 2020. So I don't know when he'll get a ruling. Could be maybe a year, 2 years, but he thinks it's going to be a favorable one. And that just tells you how screwed up his case is, how they treated him. Because if the UN is accepting it, I mean, that tells you everything, right? And obviously, Spain is a Spain is a signatory of the treaty. Okay, we're talking about the ICCPR. Let me show it to you over here. Okay, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. So again, this strictly forbids ex post facto criminalization, which is giving someone a new sentence for an old crime. Completely banned. And so, do you know what the Spanish prosecutors told the UN? The Spanish prosecutors went to the United Nations and they said, well, Mendoza was just trying to return to Spain so he could get a sentence reduction, right? Because if they had actually sent him back on time in 2009 when he got sentenced, he would have gotten 6 years, not 14, right? And the prosecutors are saying, yeah, he was just trying to get back to Spain so that his sentence would be reduced. No. He was supposed to get back to Spain because the Spanish National Court ruled that he has to go back to Spain. So, who's abusing the law? Mendoza? The national courts? This is a ridiculous argument. This is an absurd argument. Do you guys want to guess where Marlaska is now? Marlaska is the judge who gave him 14 years when he got back to Spain. Marlaska is the interior minister in Spain. Nice promotion, right? The lead prosecutor is the mayor of Seattle. The judge who screws him with 14 years is the interior minister. Nice fat promotions for these people, right? They're doing well. And so I just want to tell you a bit about what happened to Mendoza, because I think, and how this relates to Assange. Look at this logically. Why did Spain impose the condition that Mendoza has to serve his sentence in Spain? Why did they say this? Because the whole point is to protect the nucleus of the family. They can't send you so far away that it's impossible for your family to visit you. This is not allowed. But in the end, the United States, they destroyed the whole essence of this condition, because his wife divorced him. His parents both died, passed away when he was in prison. So, he tells me here, I lost my parents after 5 years in federal prison. I was deprived of hugging my mother as she suffered through pancreatic cancer. And then, that's heartbreaking. This paragraph alone is heartbreaking, right? And in terms of money, right? I told you that the U.S. took $14 million from him, right? In assets and civil, Caesar forfeiture. He says, quote, I blew my whole inheritance and every honest dollar I ever made on this case. And if I didn't have these resources, I would still be in U.S. prison. I asked him how much money he spent on all this. I was curious, how much money did he spend trying to getting back to Spain, not like the other suits that he brought, just trying to get back to Spain. He tells me between $220,000 and $250,000. That's how much he spent just trying to get back to Spain. Incredible, right? And he says he's lucky because other people, they don't have this money. They can't hire lawyers. So, he'd still be stuck in a U.S. jail. And he told me about kids that have been given life sentence for marijuana and nonviolent crimes. He told me on the paper, it says the release date is deceased. So when you're deceased, that's when you get out. I mean, it's just, it's really barbaric. But I'm not going to give so much of my opinion now. I'm just giving you the facts, what the documents say, what Mendoza, his attorneys tell me. So this is just to show you what happened to someone who did have diplomatic assurances, right? And you guys might have heard of John McAfee, Victor Boot. I think he's played by Nicolas Cage in Lord of War. Konstantin Yuroshenko. So Mendoza, he's tried to help all of these people who face extradition. And he told me a story of one German kid who was given, I don't recall what it was, maybe 7 years. He was bringing MDMA from Germany to the U.S. He was given a long sentence, and he wrote to the judge, and he wrote to a judge in Germany and said, they're not sending me back, right? Because he was also sent from Germany to the U.S. on condition that he could be returned, he could serve his sentence back home, and they wouldn't send him. And he wrote to a German judge, and the judge immediately threatened to stop all extraditions if they don't send back the kid. And they just did it. And you see the difference, right? I mean, Germany, of course, is also under U.S. control to a large degree, but you see there's a difference here, right? Like how they kind of sold Mendoza out, Spain, his own government, right? Right, so I think you guys should be able to see me again. I'm trying to switch back from the document. Hi. So, how does this relate to Assange? Well, first of all, they mentioned Mendoza's case in the court because it is a clear example of how the assurances are not enough. And even when the U.S. does sign something that is clearly worded, they violate it. And so, with Julian Assange, what have they told him? They said that, he won't be sent to ADX Florence, he won't be placed in SAMS, and he can serve a sentence in Australia. But they're not even really saying that. They're saying, here's the quote, right? They say that the United States won't put him in ADX or SAMS unless in the event that after entry of this assurance, he was to commit any future act that met the test for the imposition of a SAM. So again, it's this vague language, this ambiguity, where it's not even really an assurance. They're still reserving the right to put him under SAMS. And with Mendoza, they were still basically reserving the right to give him a life sentence and to not send him back to Spain. Because they didn't say we'll send him back to Spain. They said we won't object to him making an application to transfer to Spain. That is not the same thing. But even when the U.S. did sign a contract that they must send him back to Spain, they have to comply with the conditions of the Spanish court. It's written as clear as day. They violated it. They violated it. And so you have to consider something, that Mendoza sued Spain for not pressuring the U.S. enough, right? The conditions of his extradition were violated, his human rights were violated. Now ask yourself something. Do you think that if Assange is taken to the US and they put him in ADX Florence, and Assange tries to pressure the UK to pressure the US, that's going to work? Mendoza's lucky. He had public support. He had support from judges. He had support in the media. He had the Spanish Supreme Court on his side. Assange does not. Assange is not even from the UK. And so this is what the US will tell him. If Assange says, hey, you're not complying with the assurances that you gave me, they'll say, you're not a signatory of the extradition treaty. That's what they'll tell him in the US. And then when he goes to the UK, because the UK is a signatory, and he'll say, hey, help me. Make the US comply with the conditions. You think the UK are going to fight for him? I mean, you're dreaming. Another very important thing is that when they talk about Assange serving his sentence in Australia, this is what it says under so this is Article 3, Section F, okay? Here it is. This is the Convention on the Transfer of Sentenced Persons. It specifically states under Article 3F that a sentenced person may be transferred, quote, if the sentencing and administering state agrees to the transfer. The administering state would be Australia. So the United States can say that Assange can go to Australia. Where's Australia? Have they said anything? They haven't said anything. I can tell you because I've been covering the court here proceedings. There's been nothing from Australia. So what the US can do, because Australia is a Five Eyes country, it's a strong ally of the United States, or vassal state, whatever you want to call it, the US can just use back channels and tell the Australians, hey, don't sign anything. Don't say anything about Assange. Don't say that you're going to let him serve a sentence there. And then it won't work. Because you need both parties to say yes. You need the US and Australia to agree to it. Otherwise, it's null and void. It has no basis. So, these are things that I've explained to you, things that Mendoza is explaining very clearly because he went through it. The only reason he was able to go to Spain is because Spain signed a contract that it would take him, right? The US did too, but didn't comply. And frankly, for that matter, neither did Spain. They let him rot there for 6 years and 9 months. And they only under enormous pressure did it work. So I just want to read you a few more things here from, so you guys remember the lead prosecutor, James Lewis. He said the US have never broken a diplomatic assurance. Well, that's clearly false. The other thing, when Assange's lawyers talked about Mendoza as an example of assurances having been broken, do you know what Lewis said? He said that, yeah, but in the end, Mendoza was allowed to go to Spain. Yeah, after 7 years, almost. After 6 years, 9 months. After he sued Spain in the Supreme Court. After he started a lawsuit against Eric Holder in the DOJ. Yeah. You denied his transfer application 3 times. I have the receipts. It's right here. So I told that to Mendoza, and this is what he said. He said, that response from the prosecutor, honestly, I don't frequently lose sleep, but that's disgusting just to hear that from someone who's supposed to tell the truth to the court, right? And he said, that's like giving someone a death sentence. They managed to appeal it, and then you say you didn't try to kill them. They put every impediment they possibly could to stop me from going back to Spain. I think that's a pretty good analogy, right? So Mendoza, another interesting thing, he was in Englewood, Colorado. So it's very, very close to ADX Florence, where Assange is likely to be sent, right? And Mendoza was in a medium high security facility. So Assange would be in a federal supermax. This is about a step or 2 steps below that. And already, I mean, he told me about how they would dehumanize you. Every 3 hours there was a count. So, I mean, if they come every 3 hours to check on you and you have to give them your serial number, how can you possibly sleep? And he said that he was in the cell basically 23 hours a day. So again, I struggle to see how that's any different from, Sam's in that regard in terms of isolation and being trapped in your cell. He said the guards, if they wanted to screw with you, they'd come at 3 a.m. to ask if you want your recreation, your hour of recreation. And if you're sleepy, you say no, they won't give it to you. You have to wait till the next day, right? And they also blocked people from visiting him, his wife, just a whole mess, and this is Mendoza. Here he is with his 2 boys. So this is after the U.S. finally sent him back to Spain. But, he has a strained relationship with them, unfortunately, right? So he told me they don't call me dad, they call me David. So when James Lewis, the lead prosecutor against Assange, says that the United States have never broken a diplomatic assurance. Yeah, that's not what I have over here. That's not true. That is absolutely not true. And what Mendoza says, he says, quote, "I'm a nobody. If they're capable of doing this to me, just imagine what they can do to Assange." I get what he's saying. I don't think he's a nobody. I think that with his case, they were trying to test the waters, like they've been doing this to Colombians, they've been doing this to Mexicans, to Central Latin Americans, and they wanted to do this with Europeans, right? And they succeeded to a certain extent. Do you want to know another thing? After Mendoza got back to Spain, Spain never put another condition saying that the sentence must be served back in Spain. Can you imagine? So if you're a Spanish national, for example, and you get extradited to the US, Spain is not asking the US to send you back so you can be close to your family. They still put other conditions. Mendoza told me they still put, like, for example, no life sentence, but not the one about getting back to Spain, because he thinks that he caused so much trouble. They don't want any more trouble with the United States. Incredible, right? Absolutely incredible. So, there are so many more details that I couldn't put in the article because it's already very long, but I really recommend you go read it because it's really a preview of what they will do to Assange and what they are doing to Assange. And, I mean, in the high court, they mentioned Mendoza, I think about like 1 minute or something, but I'm convinced if a judge has these documents, they cannot extradite Assange, let alone anyone else. In 2013, the French blocked an extradition to the US. It was Linda and Michael Mastro. And why did they block it? Because of Mendoza's case. Mendoza got in touch with them. He showed them what the US gave as assurances, because they were also giving assurances to France for this couple. And France didn't. It was like, no, look what you did to Mendoza. We don't believe it. We're not extraditing them. So if the French block an extradition, why shouldn't the UK, especially when there's a history of violating assurances, violating contracts? It's incredible. So I'm again, like I said, there are so many details about this. I'm just scrolling through it, trying to remember anything else that I didn't put, because a lot of them I didn't put in the article, but it's because it was already quite long. So yeah, here's another thing. For example, right, when Mendoza sued the U.S. for breach of contract, the U.S. This is what they said. They told him that the Acta de entrega is not a contract, but a receipt for 350 euros, which is ridiculous. I mean, yes, it does say 350 euros here, right? There it is. That happened, this exchange, but it's a contract. It says in accordance with what was previously stipulated by Section 2 of the National Criminal Court. So it's very clear. It's very clear that there are terms and conditions. There's another person that I mentioned in the article that Mendoza told me about, Konstantin Yuroshenko. So this guy, he was moving drugs from South America to South Africa. And the way that they extradited him to the US, they did something called manufacturing jurisdiction, right? So again, I'll have to ask Mendoza about this. I think he mentioned it in the interview, which will come out this week. He said that basically I think Yushchenko was in a room of people, and it was briefly mentioned that they would maybe move drugs to the US or something like that. They didn't actually do it. But just because of this one sentence, they kidnapped him, they extradited him, and took him to the US. What am I supposed to say? You know? This is something that you guys need to understand. This is not something, in one regard, it's not some random thing that happened to Assange or Mendoza. This is really a big issue, and it happens to hundreds of people. Mendoza told me about seeing hundreds of people from Spain, just from Spain, being extradited to the US. Okay? What do you think the extraditions the other way around are? You think there are hundreds of Americans being extradited every year? Certainly not. So what the US is doing here is, they leave all these international treaties. They're not party to the ICC, the Rome Statute. They can't be held accountable in any way. And the only international agreements that they keep are the extradition treaties. Why? So they can keep imposing US jurisdiction on everyone. Extraterritorializing US law. That's what it's about, right? But do you think that there are so many Americans going to Germany or the UK or France or Spain or whatever? Certainly not. And Mendoza, I think he put it very well. It's not because the US has less crime. The US has the biggest prison population, so logically there's no shortage of criminals. It's just a question of the US will get its way and everyone else has to abide. Right? So I think this is a really incredible case because the whole Assange case right now is hinging on, can these diplomatic assurances from the United States be trusted? The clear answer is no. They certainly cannot be trusted. And this is the proof. This is all you need, because Mendoza was also told you can serve your sentence in your home country. Mendoza was also given diplomatic assurances. They lied. They lied. He got very lucky that he was able to get a copy of the Acta de Entrega. He was very lucky that he had the Spanish Supreme Court on his side. You think Assange has the British Supreme Court on his side? Never mind the Australian one? Certainly not. Certainly not. Australia is never going to agree to let him serve a sentence there, because unless they do, it's null and void. So I'm just going to say this very clearly. These assurances from the US, in Mendoza's case and Assange's case, are too vague. The United States leaves for itself a back door to get out of it and say, we never violated the assurances. We said, in Mendoza's case, we didn't say that we're going to send him back to Spain. We said we wouldn't object to him making an application to go to Spain, which is a different thing. But when you read it, if you're not familiar with the US legal system, if you're not aware of what they're doing, you might fall for that. In Assange's case, they say that he can go to Australia. Australia hasn't said anything. And unless Australia says yes, it doesn't mean anything. It won't happen. And if they do violate the conditions of the extradition, he has no way to contest it. There needs to be a piece of paper, just like this one, okay? Just like the Acta de Entrega, there needs to be a piece of paper with 3 signatures on it. You need to have the UK, the US, and Assange. Just like here, you have Spain, the US, and Mendoza. Otherwise, Assange can't contest it. They're going to tell him, well, you're not a signatory to the extradition treaty. You have no claim. Goodbye. So, I have nothing else to add, really, except more details from the case. But everything is crystal clear here. Everything is crystal clear. I can just give you another example with Anne Sakulis, this CIA agent who was, she fled to the US after she killed Harry Dunn. She drove on the wrong side of the road. She killed him. She fled to the US. Trump refused to extradite her. It's like, no, we're not giving you someone from the, the US. That's how they think. But it's totally okay for them to take someone from Spain, hundreds of people, right? Yeah. It's incredible, really. So I don't know when we'll have a ruling from the High Court in Assange's case, but I heard it could be soon, but that's not confirmed. As soon as we have it, of course, I'll let you know. Again, like I said, I think there's no way that the judges could look at these documents and not see what's going on and you know, allow the extradition to go forward. There's no way. You cannot look at these documents. Diplomatic assurances, a contract being violated, and then say, yeah, you know what, we'll send Assange to the US. They'll keep their promise this time. Because when there was a bail hearing in January, what was the logic? Why can't Assange get out of jail on bail even though he won his extradition case? Because they said there's a precedent of him fleeing, right? They said, oh, he went into the embassy and he stayed there for 7 years and we couldn't get a hold of him. He's a flight risk. Well, the United States has a past of not adhering by its agreements. So if you apply that logic to Assange, you have to apply to the US. You have to see that these assurances cannot be trusted just at face value from the wording, from the language. And also how they've done it with Mendoza and done it with others. Right? So the article is over here. RichardMedhurst.substack.com/Mendoza. Mendoza. Definitely go read it. And it's just really incredible what they did to him. And you know, I want to say something else because I feel like Mendoza's case is extremely interesting and shocking on its own merits. You know, it's not because it's related to the Assange case that it's interesting. No, it's interesting and shocking because of how he was treated, you know, and not necessarily because it relates to Assange. But even then, you should examine it in the context of Assange and other, extraditions and the treaties in general that exist between European countries, other countries, and the US. Must be. Because it really shows you how American diplomacy works, how the legal system works, how these diplomatic assurances work. It really shows you step by step how they violated the conditions imposed by the Spanish court. You know, they violated the contract, everything. There can be no doubt that if Assange is extradited, if anyone is extradited to the US, I mean, they're not going to get a fair chance in anything, right? So that's all I'll say for now. I think I'll leave it there for now. And I just want to thank you guys all for tuning in. My interview with Mendoza, it's a very long interview. I think it's the longest I've ever done. It'll be out this week as well. So you can watch that here on the channel. And I also did a broadcast about this case for Press TV. So, yeah, definitely go check it out. And thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for supporting independent journalism. There's links to Patreon, PayPal, everything below. I don't keep anything behind a paywall. I don't believe in that. But if you enjoy this, you found it, insightful, you learned something, you found it interesting, please think of supporting the show. And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks so much. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.